Okay, beautiful. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our Navigating Regenerative Agriculture Pathways views from along the value chains. We know that it's a very busy time of year, so we really appreciate you being here. I'd first like to start off with an acknowledgement of country. Sorry, I'm just trying to change my slides. We pay respect to the traditional owners of Lutruwita, Tasmania, the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, and acknowledge their continued survival and connection with their land, sea and sky country that spans millennia. We acknowledge the many nations of Tasmanian Aboriginal people, past and present, as the traditional and ongoing owners of their respective countries within Lutruwita and the islands. And we pay respect to those who have passed and acknowledge today's Aboriginal people who are the custodians of this land. So now, a little bit of background. We'd like to welcome everyone to introduce themselves in the chat, your organisation, your role, where you're calling in from. It'd be great just to know where you're from. And to just give you a little bit of background between this event being a collaboration between the TasFarm Innovation Hub and all three Tassie NRMs, so North, South and Cradle. NRMs perform many roles and functions, but our three soil extension officers are here to help people in the ag community to find relevant information. We are basically navigational aids, and to help them connect with people with common interests and similar challenges. And we can help build, strengthen and connect within the networks. This topic stems from an online survey that was conducted earlier this year by the Hub and all the NRMs, engaging in agricultural advisors and service providers across Tasmania. So we got some input from them, what information they really wanted to know about. And it revealed a strong interest in learning more about the successful integration of regenerative agriculture, RA, into large-scale farming. So today, we're going to delve into how RA is transforming farming operations and value chains, providing insights into its principles, challenges, and market opportunities. I'm going to hand over to Prue Rothwell from Open Food Network Australia to give you a brief overview of the RA network and the RA work that she's been involved in, and global context setting of Regen Ag before we hear from our guest speakers and dive into the Q&A session. So welcome, Prue.
Thanks,
I'll just stop sharing the screen.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to facilitate this discussion and hear from our guest speakers. My name is Prue and I'm a Food Systems Project Manager at Open Food Network Australia. Our purpose is to make regenerative food accessible through open and shared digital infrastructure for food supply networks that support resilient community food systems. Our flagship e-commerce platform helps farmers and food hubs sell direct to their communities, and we have 12 global instances that have facilitated over 228,000 orders and $17.6 million US in transactions across local food economies since 2012. As a very local example, the Tasmanian Produce Collective uses the platform to connect around 27 producers across the state directly with households. We also deliver varying food systems projects, and over the past 18 months, I've been leading the Discover Regenerative Initiative. This is an online portal that showcases Australia's leading regenerative producers, their credentials and products, with an objective to being the go-to directory for business-to-business or B2B buyers to find and connect with regenerative producers. And it's wonderful to see a few people in the webinar today that are showcased producers. And this initiative, we're taking a collaborative approach and working with key industry partners that are representing different farmer groups that are taking different approaches and to regenerative ag practices as well. So this webinar isn't about defining regen ag and what it is or isn't, or whether it is the optimal future pathway, because we only have 1 hour, and I think that is really a discussion that could be had until the cows come home. So If anyone's interested in learning more about how we've approached this with our Discover Regenerative initiative, we'll share some links in the chat and also the follow-up email as well. So despite the absence of a single definition or universally agreed principles and practices, Regen Ag is growing at a rapid rate across the globe and value chain. From small wineries such as Inkwell Wines in South Australia through to large multinationals such as Nestle, Cargill and McCain's, many businesses are increasingly integrating Regen Ag into their farming practices, sustainability frameworks and environmental commitments, with some adopting formal accreditation and certification schemes. To share a quote from John Kemp, founder of Advancing Eco-Agriculture, that weaves nicely through the topic that we're exploring today, Regen Ag is fundamentally about regenerating relationships between soil and soil microbes, landscapes and livestock and farmers and other stakeholders all along the value chain to consumers. Now, I'm delighted to welcome our guest speakers today. We've got enterprising farmer Grant Sims from Down Under Covers and sustainability and engagement specialist Laura Grubb from Greenham to share how they're applying and integrating Regen Ag principles and practices into their business. We'll first hear from Grant, and Grant, if you want to share your screens, I'll introduce you to everyone here today. So Grant is a 6th generation no-till producer from Pine Grove near Echuca in north central Victoria, running the 8,500 acre dryland family farm with some irrigation. The Sims have a strong focus on diversity and use Regen Ag principles and practices, incorporating a combination of cover crops, cattle integration, biofermented fertilizers and crop stimulants. This approach has created a thriving business and enabled them over 10 years ago to stop applying fungicides and insecticides on a commercial scale. Recently, they've diversified and established a seed business Down Under Covers and blend tailored multi-species mixes. Many broadacre farmers are now using these cover crop mixes to maximise live weight gains while also boosting farm resilience, productivity and profitability. In 2015, Grant was awarded the Coles Weekly Times Farmer of the Year. Grant is the former president of the Vic No-Till Farmers Association and is an active supporter of other farmer-driven networks such as Soils for Life. So before Grant gets started, if anyone has any questions that come to mind throughout Grant's presentation, please, you're welcome to pop them into the chat so that we can address these throughout the Q&A session in a bit. So over to you, Grant.
No worries. Oh, thanks, Prue, and thanks for having me along here today. I'll sort of jump into it because we've got limited time, but basically I'm just going to work through some things in how we've transitioned into regenerative agriculture and how we integrate that in our system. So I'll start back on sort of what it looked like at the past to sort of earn our journey to what it is now, but if this thing's going to work, oh, there we go. Yeah, so my family's been on this farm since the 1870s. My early ancestors sort of started off grazing and growing, wheat crops and things like that. Obviously using, horses and things like that. We had a lot more labour on the farms back in those days because there was less machinery. So communities were bigger. Then as it progressed through, we got bigger machines, GPS technology, which really accelerated efficiencies and in the areas we could crop and farm, which then effectively lessened the work requirements. So we got, less employees because we replaced them with machinery. But then on the back of that, like back in the early days, they would sort of grow wheat, they'd undersow it with clovers, things like that, and then drop it out into a pasture phase and run the sheep over it. And those phases were to build soil fertility, nitrogen, things like that. And, diversify incomes with other integration of livestock. Then through, into industrial agriculture, we got things like urea that come along. So all of a sudden we don't have to undersow clovers and legumes as much anymore. We can put urea on, then there was fungicides and chemicals, all these things come along as all tools. And we did that and accelerated our sort of production, what we could do. But sort of a lot of those things we found was at the expense of soil health. And we could see, you know, back then, Grandpa used to be able to grow wheat with very little nitrogen. He would never have disease, all these things, because they're so, and then all of a sudden we increased crop yields, but then insect pressures, disease pressures, all these things started happening. We'd taken a lot of diversity out of the system, and we weren't really addressing some of the nutrients and minerals with what we were doing with the modern agriculture. So today it's sort of nothing new we're doing. We've gone really back to like old systems in some way, but using modern technology and equipment to enhance that. So, you know, today we use, instead of just growing wheat and barley, and we added more diversity, and we'll grow a lot of cover crops in a phase as our cropping rotation to build soil structure and fertility. We integrate livestock through there. You know, when we get down this path, there's so many sort of bites to the cherry we can have at this one crop. You know, we can bring chickens in after this. We can get bees. As you know, I've seen people growing these pollinating flowering crops, and we can do on-farm, you know, agri-tourism. There's so many sort of options that open. So we're still using sort of modern cropping methods, but just increasing diversity. The other things where we used to just grow wheat on its own, we use a lot of companions into crops in our cropping system now. So we're using clovers, legumes, radishes and things in amongst that crop to unlock minerals in the soil, or, you know, just trying to mimic nature and go back to that more natural system where we're using plants to do the work rather than buying products out of a drum and things to do it. We're finding when we add this extra species in and diversity, we're getting improvement on soil structure, but a less eliminating the use for fungicides and insecticides by increasing diversity and soil health. The other thing with us, which is sort of different today, you know, we used to buy a lot of MAP, urea, all those synthetic fertilizers, and we were sort of addressing, you know, nitrogen, phosphorus, but we weren't really addressing some of the trace minerals. And cost of production was increasing, so was yields and things like that. But for part of this regenerative agriculture, it's about regenerating the soil, but also cost of production can get blown out. And I've seen people swing from conventional system to a more regenerative system and still spending the same money, if not more. This is a way we've set up a infrastructure at home now. We manufacture and make a lot of our own biofermented fertilizers that we apply to our crops to improve crop health and then in turn soil health. The other side of this is creating jobs. Like I said earlier, like our farm used to employ a lot of families, and then as machinery replaced them. And today, a lot of broadacre farms, you know, when we were just conventional farming, we could do 10,000 acres with me and my old man and one employee, and we could cover that area with machinery. Whereas now we've sort of built some other enterprises to stack, which is while we're trying to improve the soil. So we've got, you know, the cover crop business, we've created jobs, we're making our own fertilizer, all to integrate within our system. And now we have, you know, me and the old man plus 6 full-time employees, we're trying to regenerate not only the soils in the environment, but our communities in their farming world as well. Some of the drivers that sort of led us down this path, you know, a couple of reasons. One, environmental extremes that we're in Australia here. We're either, you know, we go from drought to flood, too hot to too dry. And I started questioning, how can we be in flood this year and in drought the next year? And it shouldn't be like that. Their soils have functioned for thousands of years in those, but through modern agriculture, cultivation and overgrazing, we've destroyed a lot of our structure and soil health. So what we started to do, you know, we had in the 2000s, early 2000s, we had sort of that millennial drought, and it really stood out then. We'll look at areas of the farm that would harvest good crop off and other areas that would struggle. And then we dive deeper. Why is that? What's the difference between the good and the bad? And it's usually organic carbon, soil structure. If we can hold that moisture. So that was a real big driver, loss of ground cover, loss of soil structure. So we started working on ways and systems and principles to improve that. Then we saw, you know, our soils become more resilient to those environmental extremes by regenerating these soils. The other driver that really sort of pushed me on this path as well was one of my first jobs back on the farm back then was in the boom spray. And I'd get the recommendation, right, we're going over this wheat crop, put this insecticide in, put this in, all these things, all these sides we're putting in, just in case we got a disease later, or in case there was an insect there, we may as well do it now just while we're going over it. And it didn't really gel with me, that. But the other thing was, you know, we've got to go out every year and do this now. And it was part of the system. And I spoke to grandpa and my old man, and they said, like in the 70s when we grew wheat, we never used to have to use a fungicide. We never used to had to spread 200 kilos of urea on it. But now every year we've got to do this. And we sort of looked at it and I said, something's wrong with this system or the soil. And it all comes back to that. And so this regenerative agriculture was a way where we could, let's address the soil, let's regenerate that soil and stop those problems from happening. And now to the point where we're not having to treat symptoms anymore, we're addressing, cutting it off at the start. And by the methods we use in increasing diversity, you know, nutrient biology, all those things, we see less symptoms appearing. You know, we don't just, there's a lot of changes we had to make. So we looked at things that potentially are detrimental to this process. And so we want to minimize or eliminate those things and then increase things that can encourage this. So some of the inputs that we change. So I'm not saying we can't use MAP or some of these ureas, like they're all good in amounts, but we tried to look at, well, what's some alternatives? If we need some phosphorus into the system, what is a safer way to get it in that's not detrimental to soil health and building that soil and the fungi and the microbes? So when we started looking at alternatives, we don't want to just go in blind and use them without any kind of, you know, knowledge. So I do a lot of trials on farm. I've done trials for years. I love doing trials. I'm always in the tractor thinking up more crazy ideas to do. But with modern agriculture and machinery, we can easily map these areas out. And I'll talk about designing them in a second. But this is an example where we might have been using MAP on the left, which was addressing some of the nutrition, but we wanted to use a more balanced approach. So we'd put a liquid in with, you know, all the trace minerals and adding some biology in. We will then map those areas out. We will monitor them through the year through tissue testing, and then obviously harvest it at the end of the year, at the season, for yield, and not only yield, but profitability as well. Gross margins and cost of production comes in. You know, that's one focus. Also, how it impacts the environment. My staff using it, I'd rather not them, you know, if we've got to use a chemical, it's there as a tool, but I'd rather them be handling biologicals and nutrition and stuff like that that's less harmful for them, as well as the crop and the soil. So these are other examples. We've done testing liquid fertilizers in the same paddock where we'd mapped out areas comparing the fertilizers before we jump all in and use them. We've tried, you know, a lot of stuff with seed root development, seed inoculants. You know, I've done so much work with this. You know, we've had different companies, Caesar, in pest management, GRDC. We ran 4-year trials with them. I've ran my own trials for 20 years on the farm, and in the last probably 5 to 10 years, I've had research companies now coming to our farm and saying, right, we want to look at what you're doing here in terms of, you know, chemicals and insecticides on the seed versus not. So we did trials with the GRDC. I've done trials with other companies, research companies in measuring carbon sequestration in the soil under our management. Universities, some really cool stuff going on. Some of these guys, one at Sydney University, are measuring root exudates and how they interact when other plants are put in proximity of that plant, how they interact. So there's lots of things we can do ourselves. But the main thing, know your goals, know what you're trying to do. I'd set aside an area on your farm to repeat it on, because 1 year of trials is probably not enough, because, you know, environmental, like it could be a good year this year and a poor year next year. So ideally, we'd set aside a few paddocks where we trial a practice on, or a management or a new product for 3 or 4 years in a row. We want a control strip so that we've got something to measure and then monitor and record. You know, if we don't have that control, we don't know. And a lot of times logistically with, us farmers, we come in, we're busy, we just sow the whole paddock, but it's pretty easy. I have an app on my phone, like a voice recorder. I can look at what row I'm on in the GPS and go row 6, I flick the fertilizer on double, or I turned it off, and I record it and on that app, and then that'll time stamp it, a date and a time and a location. And because when we're busy sowing and harvesting, sometimes we don't have, we forget. If we don't record it then, we can come back after sowing or at harvest, and I can look at this app and I've got an exact time and date, and then I can count how many rows it was. And it's quite simple and easy just to flick something on and off for a little bit and just see, do double rate, half rate, no rate with inputs, but also, management of practices can take time as well. Research groups, that look at them, I think universities are always looking. A lot of these research groups are quite often looking for ideas and things to do. So if you're got some good things, you get in touch with the NRMA, and they can sometimes, groups like this can connect you with those outlets. The other one is, getting involved in, different networks. And, like Bruce said earlier, I was president of ICNO for a number of years. That's a very, good group. They sort of operate all around Australia now with, with a focus on soil health. There's Soils for Life, a number of different sort of networks, but I highly encourage you to get involved in that. One, because when we are looking at changing practice on our farm, sometimes, there's a lot of peer pressure and all the neighbours are doing this, and you go to the pub and everyone's like, oh, what crazy thing you're doing. And it can sometimes inhibit you down that path because you're too worried about what you may be doing something wrong, or you don't have the confidence. But when we go to these networks where they're focusing on this, you'll find a large area of people, diversity of people doing similar things or trying it, which is good. I definitely recommend taking a support person from your own farm or your own enterprise to those networks to come along to the field days and the workshops, because they're the support person, whether it be your husband, wife, or father, son, or your agronomist even. It's when you come away from that event and you go back into your enterprise and you go to try something and you have that doubt and you're not sure, it's that support person that was there with you that says, hey, remember they said this, or do that. So it's just to help you along there, but also it's then that network that you have, that you can call someone in that group and ask them, on that area where you're wanting to change. The other cool thing with the networks and how effective they can in accelerating your learning is when we're farming, most enterprises, whether it's growing grain crops or potatoes or whatever, we sort of get one shot at it this year, and then that's it till next year. So it can take a long time to do 10 new things, because it could take 10 years. Whereas if we've got a network of people and we all go away and try something new each, and then come back and share, we can all, get on our journey a lot faster. So that's very good. Like I mentioned earlier, Soils for Life, all these catchment groups are very good. Vic No Till on the Plains, I've been involved, spoke over there, and there's some really cool stuff happening here in Australia, but also overseas. So there's plenty of stuff to get out there and have a look around. When we are making these management things, we need to allow time. Some things can happen. I've seen soils change in 1 year. It all comes down to how much rainfall, how much root matter we're able to grow, is how fast we can get there. But, if we've got irrigation and things, we can speed it up. But I'd at least allow 3 to 5 years because it can take time. You can quickly damage things. You can damage things in 1 year very fast, but sometimes it can take a while to rebuild. And sort of these photos here, just an example of that, where the top left was a farm we bought that had been knife point press wheel, and the subsoil was quite blocky and hard. When we changed to a disc seeder, so zero tillage and control traffic and minimize our compaction and basically stop cultivation, we saw that soil change from that to crumbly, beautiful subsoil. It would take about 3 to 4 years from transitioning from a tine to a disc to see that structure change. We can accelerate that by getting roots in there faster and soil ameliorants, but at least allow 3 or 4 years for that transition to take place. The other thing I think important on that is aside one paddock that you're going to dedicate this to and following all the principles. You've got to be careful. If we go to a new crop, it could take 2 or 3 years to perfect how we grow that. So if we transition the whole farm in 1 year and it all goes wrong, it can be very hard financially and mentally. So sometimes we need to keep doing what we know works and then set aside one area where we can make the changes and stick to it. Because if we are doing the changes and we're progressing along and then we convert back, oh, this year I've got to go and do something bad, or, change it back to an old way, you undo all that work. The other thing, sort of to point out that if we do have to come in and cultivate or do something that might, slow us down on where we want to go, it's good to know how can we, remedy that and undo some of that work and essentially get the roots in, get diversity in, and that's how we can repair some of that damage. But yeah, allow yourself that time. How do we measure some of the success in our business? Well, it all comes down for me. The first thing when I make it, your values, your goals, all that, but it comes down to the soil for me is the first thing that I look off ticking off, because if that's not healthy and successful, the soil, everything falls apart. So that's the number one. So, are we increasing our organic carbon? Are we improving our soil structure, infiltration, water holding capacity, the life biology in the soil, things like that? So that's how we measure. If those things are happening, everything else will follow eventually. So we get that right. But the other important thing of all this, regenerating the soil is financial health too, because there's no point. I've seen at times we're trying to do all these things to improve soil health and we go broke in the process. We're not going to be here long term either. So return on investment, is this going to be right? Are we going to be spending more money? Essentially, we want to be becoming more cost efficient, in our costs, net profit. So many times I see, how do we measure success? Oh, we've grown an 8-ton crop. So we go to the pub and we're successful because we've grown a big crop. We're measuring it on yield, but really it's gross margins, cost of production. Do we have cash flow? I've done so many of these events all around the country and see the people going, we're making all this money. It comes in here, but then it goes out there, and whether we need to be able to hang on to some of that money and keep it for ourselves, instead of spending it back straight out the door. So all those things need to come in, and that's where regenerative farming, we can start putting more money into our own pocket and soils rather than it going out the door. And then, for different businesses, when you get into the different markets, which I'll talk about, open up, positive feedback are we getting from our customers? Are they increasing our sales and things like that? So there's all little ways we can measure what we do. But for us, soil comes first, always comes first. Marketing opportunities and that, when we've gone, into regenerative, I suppose this is the difference we've got to change in our mind. When we're growing grain, that grain is a bulk commodity. But I used to really not like being a commodity producer, because we're food producers. When we get down this path, we're not just growing commodities, we're growing food. And I know in the grain industry now, like there's a lot of work coming into in the regenerative space, an awareness of nutrient density and how we grow this with less chemicals, things like that. I did a forum recently with someone focusing on nutrition and human health, and they identified what identifies or which system produces the most healthiest food, and that's one that's grown in a soil with the most microbial diversity. So that's where regenerative farming, adding microbial diversity from a diversity of roots, can increase that. Once that happens, we get more nutrient density, markets can open, we can start getting premiums for the food we grow because of the nutrient density and less chemical requirement. That's for our grains. I see a lot of opportunities to direct market, value add, produce your own flour, milk, direct sales like that. And then depending on your enterprise, but livestock, I see a lot of paddock to plate sort of operations where people want the connection. There's so many things now on Netflix with an awareness of food production and how we do it. And in the cities, where, we've got good opportunities to tell the story. We're trying to build soils and grow a healthier product with less chemicals. It's a pretty good selling point for higher premiums. And then, Laura will talk next with Greenhams, but these are some of our cattle. We sell our weaners every year into some of the weaner sales. We're now getting premiums on them, one, because through this system, we get more uniformity in our animals, more animal health, temperament improves. So people will pay for a premium for those things. But then the grass-fed program we're on here, there's premiums there to be involved. So there's a lot more opportunity to market and get around it. And I think farmers are generally very poor at marketing. We're good at growing things, but we pay the freight both ways, and we sell for wholesale and buy everything at retail. Whereas when we can direct market, we've got the opportunity to put, cut out that middleman and put a lot more money in our pocket again. So just mindful of time there. The other thing with transitioning into this regenerative type of farming, like I said, I'd put aside a small area, do those things, take time. It takes time for your soils to adapt, build biology, build fungi back in, build that soil structure, but get those areas right and then expand on that. It's very exciting once you start to see those soil changes, and it can be little things like I encourage people to get out, have the shovel, check soil structure, look for worms. All those things are indicators that we're going the right way. But, you'll know yourself when rainfall events, look at how when you get an inch of rain overnight, how quickly it disappears in your soil or not. We can measure all these things. We have to have something to measure. But when we get those things right, we can have a lot, farming can be fun. We can get the fun back into farming with improving that resilience in the soil. The other thing, I think to help make these changes and support farmers is, those groups, like I said earlier, Soils for Life, Big No Till, Joiner Network, these sort of places do a lot of case studies, and there's lots online you can look up. So there's whatever you're thinking, there's generally someone else out there that's already done it. So we don't have to go and start and, with all your own mistakes. Someone's already done it, made mistakes, and improved on that and learned. So we can look at these case studies, join a network like NRMA. They'll put you in touch with people that have already made the changes and doing it. How are we going for time?
Yeah, we're pretty much there, Grant.
Yeah, cool.
Any other last pearls, or should we save them to the Q&A?
Yeah, we can save it for the Q&A. I'll wrap it up there. But yeah, definitely encourage, try a few things on your own and get out there and get out off your farm, out of your state, come over here, the mainland, go overseas. There's so much cool stuff happening now in this regenerative space. So yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks again, and yeah, we'll keep in touch.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Grant. That was awesome. There's definitely been a couple of questions coming in. So if any further questions come up that you're percolating, please send them into the chat and we'll bring them up in the Q&A. So yeah, thank you, Grant. And in the interest of time, I'm going to jump right into introducing our next guest speaker, Laura. So Laura is a sustainability and engagement specialist at Greenham and is deeply passionate about showcasing the sustainability of beef production and is fascinated about exploring collaborative relationships along the value chain. With over 10 years experience, Laura has worked with producers across Australia, North America and developing countries, helping them translate consumer trends into on-farm practices for healthy businesses. Now with Greenham, Laura collaborates with 10,000 cattle suppliers, global customers and plant staff to lead the continuous development of their sustainability initiatives, such as the Greenham Beef Sustainability Standard. So again, any questions that you have for Laura during her presentation, if you'd like to send them into the chat, and then we'll go through those in the Q&A session. So over to you, Laura.
Great. Thanks, Prue. And thanks, Grant. It's very hard to follow that. I reckon we could listen to you all day. So that was awesome. But I've been asked to come in and talk a little bit about the markets, understanding that probably most people on this call aren't predominantly beef farmers. So try not to get you guys too locked into the beef market, but more what do global markets look like for the regenerative space. So as Prue said, I work for Greenham. We are a family business. If my screen, there we go, it's going to jump over. We're a family business, been going for 6 generations. We have 2 processing plants in Victoria and 1 in Tassie. So I do spend a lot of time in Tassie. I think there's a few people on the call that I've spent some time with, which is fantastic. And this is something that the Greenham family has been really passionate about for generations. We're a predominantly grass-fed business, and we took the leap a few years ago to jump into sustainability. This is currently our market breakdown as a business. We export approximately 90% of our product, 70% of that's going into the US, and we are exporting a very premium product. You might be aware of some of our brands such as Cape Grim. They fetch high prices. We're not looking at your everyday, what are you having on a Wednesday night? These are special occasions, high net worth kind of individuals. We're looking at that sort of end of the market, and we're starting to see people have the luxury of being able to be values based in their purchases, which is fantastic for us as a nation because we have such wonderful values in our production systems. So we saw this as an opportunity to capitalize on these requests we were getting from different customers. And we did a bit of a survey of our producers in partnership with MLA. Of our customers, sorry, in partnership with MLA, of where they are sitting with sustainability. So our main market is this top row here, the US, and they're really developed in their understanding of sustainability. They've already been looking and have been for several years now for sustainable type claims, so free from, natural, those sort of aspects. They're moving away. Remember, these aren't your everyday, just middle income. We are looking at those with a bit more disposable money. They are moving away from simply country of origin to starting to look for that provenance story. And that's when those values of getting deep down into what does that value chain look like and how are those animals raised, we're starting to see those sort of ethos come about in their purchasing habits. We in Australia, we are slowly coming along this sustainability journey. You guys would all see, whether it be your farmer's market or your supermarket or your different restaurants you go to, you're starting to see some of these themes come through, but they're not the mainstay of what we're buying as individuals here in Australia. So we're starting to see that coming, and that's a good opportunity for us domestically. What we're seeing overseas, Japan is another long-term customer for us, and we're actually seeing sustainability as a different conversation. This one's been driven more by policy as opposed to consumers individually choosing sustainability as products. So the government in Japan has actually put in place quite forward-facing, forward-leaning regulations around how corporates are gathering products, so what they're importing and what requirements do they meet, which is fantastic because that brings that whole bar of that nation up in terms of a sustainable product. So it's really interesting to see how we're getting kind of a push-pull mechanism coming through in a lot of these global markets. We have, as most of us on this call are probably aware of, we're seeing lots of government, whether it be international or domestically here, lots of requirements around sustainability. We, for example, as of next year, are going to be having to do mandatory climate reporting for the vast majority of businesses in Australia, which is great. We're starting to really have a look at what we're doing as a business and how we're making those purchasing decisions, because the power of a business is scaled as opposed to an individual consumer. So we're starting to see a lot of these policy aspects, but it's also been accompanied by a growing demand from consumers who are becoming more aware of what it is that they're purchasing. As Grant kind of touched on, people are starting to really think about what the impact of their purchasing decisions are and trying to purchase within their values alignment where that is financially viable. And it's difficult at the moment when we're in such a stressed economic climate globally. So we're probably not seeing that full force of a values purchase at this moment in time. So where Greenham had been seeing this occurring across many years, and this request for sustainability claims from our customers, global customers, increasing as to the point where we're getting requests for different information around sustainability on pretty much a weekly basis from different customers. They're really, really curious. And we have to remember these are global customers. They're not necessarily familiar with what we're doing here in Australia. And so it's always a challenge for us to understand what it is that they're looking for. And that led us down the regenerative path. We came across lots of studies that were indicating that consumers are resonating with the term regenerative. And then we've seen more studies since backing that claim up. So the reason why, when we delve into it, that consumers are starting to look for regenerative claims is that they're scared of greenwashing. they have heard horror stories about they think they're buying something that is green, is good for the climate, good for them. And then it turns out several years later of them being loyal to those brands that they may not have been purchasing what they thought they were purchasing. So consumers are starting to look for outcomes. And that's where regenerative comes in, right? It's all outcomes focused. That's really what we're trying to sell. And that's what we're trying to prove that we can do. So we, as a company, did adopt regenerative. We have our green and beef sustainability standard, which I'll get to in a moment, and that allows us to sell a regenerative product at a certain point. And it's meaning that we can talk directly to the consumer about what their values are in a way that they understand. They don't necessarily understand everything that's happening on Grant's farm, but they understand what healthy soils, healthy plants, and good for people means. So we can talk to them in those manner. And you'll see when we get to the standard how we're able to kind of have that discussion. It's also allowing us to reframe this conversation. It's moving from being defensive to being more proactive because we're early moving in this space, and which was a risk for our business. Was we wanted to be able to help drive that conversation and be a bit more proactive rather than perhaps what we as food industry have traditionally done over the years, particularly in these bigger businesses like ourselves, dealing in, essentially more of a commodity. We're able to have that discussion and say, this is actually what we're doing, and this is the impact of those practices on the planet. This is what we can show you, and it's backed by data. So being able to show those positive environmental impacts is not only good for us as a business selling that product and able to access a premium in that market, but it also, as a business, is recognized from the board level down that this is part of resilience of our business as well. If we are actually looking after the land that we're producing these cattle on, we'll have cattle for generations still. And as a family business, and Pete Greenham Jr. now has 3 children and he's hoping to pass the business on to them, he wants to make sure that there is a healthy business here in Australia for them to have. So this is where we're heading as a business. And whilst it has been a really big task and probably one of the first of this scale in Australia to happen, it's something that we thought someone's got to do it first. We have a pretty big risk appetite, and I know some of the people on this call probably been consulted along that way. So we'll jump into now what that standard looks like. And please do pop any questions in the chat, and more than happy to have a more detailed discussion with those that are super interested. So in November last year, so 12 months ago, we launched the Green and Beef Sustainability Standard. This is an optional module for our producers. We have 10,000 producers across Australia, 4,700 in our Never Ever program, of which Grant is one of them. And this is a new optional module that people can undertake. As we know, everyone probably on this call knows that this is still an emerging space. It's not common practice to use a lot of these terminologies. So it's something that we want to go slow and let people adapt to. We took this sustainability standard and aligned it with the beef sustainability framework and CN30, which is a goal for the red meat industry, so that people had something they could recognize as part of industry. And then we took that and gave that to a group of our producers who kindly put their hands up, and we gave them a crack at doing up a sustainability standard. The idea of it being it needs to be practical on farm. We can't be taking customer requirements and saying good luck, have fun, because we know that doesn't always translate. So we took ABSF pillars and then we gave that to some producers. They had a crack. We went back to some customers and said, does this resonate with you? Given that that's a global audience, so it's really important that the language translates. We use a lot of lingo on farm. We need to make sure our customer understands that as well. Producers then took that second version of the standard and did a 6-month trial of implementing that, seeing what data we can collect and how feasible that was and the impact on their business. As Grant mentioned, you can't see a lot of outcomes necessarily in terms of change in 6 months, but we can understand what is feasible to be collected on a regular basis in a business that will allow us to track change over time. Well, one of the key areas that came out of this trial was that people are in different stages of this journey. So we actually divided the standard up into 3 tiers. So our first tier is just for people to kind of dip their toes in the water. It's really looking at base regulatory requirements and a couple of new ideas. And it just gives people a chance to kind of get familiar and get comfortable with what sustainability and regenerative means in their business. We then moved to tier 2, where we're starting to do a lot more measurement and planning, and this is where we're able to meet raising claims for a regenerative product. And we're able to actually start paying producers a premium here because we're able to sell that product as a regenerative product. We then have tier 3 because we do have some phenomenal producers who are doing some really cool things, and we recognize that they want to kind of get that recognition for the work that they're doing. And that's, there's a few things in there that we see where the industry is going, such as CN30. So we kind of staged it out so people can join us on the journey where they are at that point in time, with the idea that, where people are feeling more comfortable with this and starting to implement new practices, we can recognize that change and progression through the standard. So our pilot producers, for those that are on the call, might recognize some of these areas. We did try to get a really big cohort of different producers and different production systems. A lot of them were mixed, some of them were straight beef. We had small family operations, we had large corporates, and the idea was that way we can get a good cross-section of what might be practical on farm. And that's where we worked out where we are today. So our sustainability standard, when we're talking to our customers, allows us to make claims in market around prioritising soil health, enhancing natural landscapes, supporting healthy waterways, improving climate resilience, promoting biodiversity, and increasing carbon storage. So they're the things that customers are looking for, right? The consumer who's sitting there looking for their next steak that they're purchasing from ButcherBox, for example, they're the sort of things that they can go, oh, I understand what that is. They don't need to know Grant's specific grazing pattern or what he put necessarily on his crops that year. They just want to understand that what he's doing is having these outcomes. And so that's how we're able to have those discussions with our customers. And as with anything in our industry, we drive integrity. We think everything should be backed by science. And we took the opportunity of making sure we consulted with leading scientists in Australia and overseas and make sure it aligns with core principles in regenerative agriculture. And so we can set the standard. We don't want regenerative to become, like some other claims that have been made over the years, which perhaps get watered down. We thought it was really important to set a really good baseline for what regenerative could be. And I know there'll be some people on this call who are going well and truly above and beyond that and demonstrating the absolute best practice, and that's amazing. But we wanted to make sure that we're setting kind of a floor in that market around regenerative. So everything we've got is backed by science. It is approved by OSMEAT and USDA, which are our two label compliance bodies. And that's something that we'll continue to do, and where there are more learnings in this space, we'd love to keep evolving this standard. So for producers, they are required to meet indicators around 4 different areas in our sustainability framework. So animal welfare, absolutely pinnacle for consumers across the globe. This is something that's really a non-negotiable. A key area of this is pain relief. We as a business are really focused on that and making sure that that becomes a really standard practice in industry, as it is with our industry goals. Environmental stewardship is our largest pillar in the standard and covers all those areas that you can imagine. And that's really the area that producers are really starting to work out how we can keep better records, so that way we can monitor that progress over time. As Grant's saying, that we can actually see those changes, and then we can see how that's impacting our business. Also, as Grant mentioned, we don't exist without economic resilience. So making sure that everything we do is still being measured within our economic aspects of our business. We're monitoring that. We're still staying, as we say, it can't be green if you're in the red. So making sure we're keeping those KPIs, but also bringing sustainability into the day-to-day conversation around the business and not having it as a side aspect. It's actually a key pillar, kind of that triple bottom line notion. And people and community. This is something that we in ag often overlook. We forget about ourselves and our staff and our community. This is a smaller area of our sustainability standard because we do have a long way to go in this. And it's really around making sure we're putting in place a lot of workplace health and safety. There's a big aspect in ag we often forget because we're in it every day, how dangerous the sector is that we work in. And so this is an area we really wanted to focus on is making sure that we're really, thinking about workplace health and safety in our day-to-day business as well. But we hope to see that pillar kind of grows and evolves to capture some other community benefits down the track as the industry is starting to get towards that. So as I mentioned, we do have the 3 tiers here. It's really important that we, for our philosophy, that we're encouraging people to think ahead in terms of their business resilience. And so that way people can join us on that journey where they're comfortable, but hopefully get some ideas about where they might be able to improve. So those premiums don't kick in until tier 2. And then we hope that continues for a while yet. So I know there'll be questions from the NRM teams on here about the adoption of these practices. So when we've asked producers about, what they've seen in this and our experiences in talking with producers and implementing this standard, most people are already doing strategic grazing management. They're already starting to look at climate preparedness. That's something that, we deal with on not even just a daily basis, a seasonal and planning basis. Soil testing is becoming a far more common practice in beef production. I know it has been in cropping for a very long time, but we're starting to see that more in beef. We're starting to see a lot more performance monitoring and feedback, weed management and ground cover management. So they're the things that, we're not having too much difficulty in being able to measure in our daily businesses. But the things that producers are still learning and implementing in their businesses is carbon accounting and action plans. I think that's new for all of us though. So that's something that we're supporting them in and understanding what that means for their business and identifying opportunities. Soil biology testing, this is a fantastic area and something I'm really passionate about, but getting this at a commercially scalable level is still quite a challenge across industry. And so we are implementing this and doing a lot of lab and field tests with our producers, and really looking forward to seeing what research institutions are able to kind of put forward as more sophisticated ways of collecting this data going forward. And then another big area that we have seen gaps in with producers is around the workplace health and safety. So induction checklists, hazard identification and risk assessments in our daily businesses. We always forget those things. We forget to protect ourselves. We're so focused on our animals. And so they're the sort of things that we're still working with producers to continue to implement as part of this program. And as always, we're all terrible and time poor and don't keep records. So it's something that's always a challenge, and we're really excited that there's a lot of new ways of collecting these records. And Grant, I do hear a lot of people collecting voice notes and sending them to me. So I think that's catching on as a far more efficient way when you have a thought about what you could be doing or what you have done. And so it's really cool to see how everyone's adapting and their different learning processes in this. So this is an area that we are building out lots of templates and systems and working with different providers to support producers in the adoption of regenerative practices. But I do encourage anyone, if you have any other resources that you're aware of, or if you're a training organization, please do get in touch, because I'm always looking for new opportunities. Producers are spread across Australia. So there's a lot of things that I'm not aware of that's available. And if I can connect them into those community and peer groups, that would be absolutely fantastic. So do sing out. Definitely an advocate of using networks. So in being conscious of time, and I think we've all gone over time today, but our key takeaways really is that sustainability has now become a market driver. We're starting to see consumers really making purchasing decisions. We're able to harness a premium at the moment. How long that will continue for, I'm not sure. We're in a different climate to perhaps we would have been 10 years ago if we went on this journey. But I think for all the producers on the call today, definitely talk to your markets and understand how they're tackling sustainability, because I think you'll find that there could definitely be market advantages to being able to promote that product. Secondly, regenerative does provide an outcomes focus to sustainability, which I think is fantastic for all of us on this call today. It's really about putting outcomes first, not just talking and putting a label on something, but actually getting something that we know isn't benefiting the environment and benefiting our business. And I think lastly that we have a huge opportunity here in Australia to position ourselves as a regenerative food producer. We do fantastic things already. There's always stuff we can improve on, of course, but we are in a unique position where we're not highly industrialized in terms of our agriculture. We have so many fantastic people doing amazing things and with the outcomes to demonstrate. So I think this is something that everyone on this call is probably already recognizing, but it'd be really great to see this movement grow. That's all from me. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Laura. And yeah, really appreciate Laura and Grant both presenting how Regen Ag is integrating and into their businesses and in varying ways. We've got a couple of minutes in terms of the Q&A part. And Grant, if you're there, I just wanted to quickly raise a question that had come in earlier, which was quite specific in terms of their context, but I wondered if you could speak to it more generally in terms of where is it best for farmers to get specific support and advice on what multi-species to be sowing pending their landscape context?
Yeah, good question. Those sort of ones, like I do a fair bit of that. Like, so if people could email through Down Under Covers, like we can sort of look into that as well. I know Soils for Life are putting out, or they actually have put out a resource guide that around multi-species and how to, there's sort of a step-by-step. There's a lot of videos. I was involved in that as well, so other growers around the country. So I'd definitely look up that. There is some stuff in the States that's quite good. Some resource guides, green cover seeds, and some of the work there. But it's a little bit, you got to then adapt it to our environment, rainfall, latitude. And then it's all in imperial as well. So the metrics have got to be converted. But yeah, there's a few avenues. I'd definitely look up Soils for Life as a good starter, and then just get online. Email me if I can help. We can do that as well.
Awesome, thank you. And question, because I know nutrient density is definitely a hot topic at the moment. And so there was a question from Jacob around for Grant, how you are measuring and valuing nutrient density in your products. And I wonder, Laura, if you could also speak to that in terms of, is that an area that Greenham is also exploring and looking at as a part of the program?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, good question. It is a hot topic, and it's been for a number of years now. They're working on it. I've been sending grain and samples over at the States to a few places over there where they've been trying to calibrate, in terms of they can sort of measure it, but they need to sort of see what's high, what's low to calibrate, in terms of nutrient density. It is a tricky thing to measure, but I know in the UK, they're looking at sort of similar to what Greenhams are doing, like a system seeing that if you're ticking these boxes in terms of adding diversity and the principal type stuff to regenerate soils, that will fall into a category where we could sell it as a premium product. But yeah, in terms of measuring nutrient density, like bionutrient.org, that Dan Kittredge, those sort of guys are working on it. We haven't tested out, like we've sent ours away to be tested, and we're not marketing it on that yet, but there'll be a point of time where we can do that. And if we're already positioned ourselves to be able to do that, the premiums can be got there while, along the way. But yeah, I don't know if Laura's can chime in on that.
Yeah, we are not specifically measuring nutrient density as a business, but I do believe the red meat industry across the globe has multiple projects looking at this. It's always been looked at from a grain versus grass perspective, but I think that's starting to evolve now into what can we feed and change that nutrient profile. So I don't think we would be too far away. I reckon the next decade it'll probably be, it's such a hot topic at the minute. I think we'll have that across different food aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm just going to do one last question, and I apologize that Q&A was cut a bit short, but I think everyone would have got a lot out of the presentations today. So another one from Jacob, which is for Grant. How do you manage the balance between productivity and other drivers like soil organic matter production?
Yeah, that's a good question. Particularly like in dairy cows and things where we're looking at a high production in terms of the milk and all that, times when you graze, like you sort of got two things you're trying to grow, the animal or the soil. And there's got to be a compromise there, because if you're purely focused on producing milk or meat, you don't focus anything on the soil, it can be detrimental. And so feeding the soil some ground cover and that is helpful. I've done trials on this where we've split a paddock in half and done both ways, and found where we trampled and lost a bit of organic material back into the soil, we got double or triple the yield the next year. So that all comes into it over time as that builds. But we've also found that we can still, like I'm grazing some of these cover crops at, nearly peak flowering when you've got maximum dry matter and root growth, and we're still getting 2 to 3 times the industry live weight gains on grass when we measure it. So we're increasing soil health as well as doubling the average live weight gains on grass. So I think we can do the both together if we design it well and choose the right species and set up the grazing management around that. So it can be done, both at the same time.
Awesome, thank you. And in terms of the other questions that haven't been answered yet today, what we might do is look at providing some responses to those in the follow-up question email that goes out, if that's okay. And I'll hand back over to Ruth to close out. But yeah, thank you again, Grant and Laura.
No worries.
Oh, you're just on mute, Ruth.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, so just a big thanks to our presenters for sharing your time, your knowledge, and insights today. It was really great. To let everyone know about an upcoming event, Grounded Australia is happening in Tassie on the 4th and 5th of December. NRM South will have a stall there, and Open Food Network team will be there too. So it's a great opportunity to catch up and keep the conversations going. And thanks everyone for attending. We'll send out the recording, the links, the resources, and also follow up on some of those questions that we didn't get to as well. When you close out of this, you're going to have a pop-up of a 2-minute survey. So thanks very much for taking the time to complete it. We really appreciate your feedback, and it helps improve future events as well. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, really appreciate it.
Thanks, have a great day.